I threw my son the most extravagant graduation party money could buy only to watch him stand up in front of everyone and declare he was cutting ties with me, toasting to the happiness of my husband and his mistress. They all thought I'd swallow it quietly, like I always did, that I'd sweep up the mess while they danced on my dignity. But they forgot I am not the kind of woman who breaks. And this time, I'm done playing dumb. If he no longer wants me as his mother, then I'll be taking back everything that I had provided: his tuition, his father's medical bills, and the very roof over their heads. I spent 2 whole weeks planning every detail of my son Leo's high school graduation party, from the flowers to the menu, the height of the candle holders to the vintage of the champagne. I chose it all myself, because I wanted Leo to remember this night. He had ranked first in the entire state and secured early admission to Harvard. I thought, how many moments like this are there in a lifetime? As his mother, I wanted to give him a grand send-off, a curtain call for his youth. What I didn't realize was that this would become the most bitter rehearsal of my life. I stood in the second row beneath the stage, peeking through the floral pillars as Leo stepped up after the MC called his name. He wore a blue suit, custom-tailored, paid for by me. He looked so grown-up. I whispered to Diana, my closest friend, the woman Leo always called his second aunt. Diana smiled. He should be proud of you, Jane. I smiled back, though I didn't say what I was really thinking. I hope so, too. Then Leo spoke. His voice was clear, sharp through the microphone, even harsh. I have 2 announcements tonight, he said. I assumed the first would be a thank you to his parents. At the very least, I thought he'd acknowledge all I had sacrificed to support him. But what came out of his mouth slapped me across the face. First, I've decided to sever all ties with Jane. The room fell into a stunned silence. The jazz music kept playing faintly in the background. Guests still held flutes of champagne in hand. But nobody knew what expression to wear. I froze. The world went silent. No hesitation from Leo. He continued, like he was reading from a pre-written speech. Second, I want to offer my full support for my father and Ms. Martha as a couple. I hope their relationship can be accepted and celebrated by our family and friends. My ears rang. I could hear people gasp, the clink of glass, and somewhere deep inside, the heavy thud of my heart crashing down. Martha stood next to my husband Greg, head bowed, hands twisting nervously, eyes brimming with tears. She looked like she was the one being publicly humiliated. Greg didn't speak, didn't deny, didn't explain. He simply rested a hand on Martha's back, quietly affirming Leo's declaration. Then Martha choked up, turned, and ran out of the hall with a hand over her mouth like she was the victim. Greg followed right after. I couldn't breathe. Even staying upright felt like a struggle. Diana reached out to steady me. I tried to speak, but my throat clamped shut. Not a single word would come out. Leo stared at me, eyes glinting with a kind of smug cruelty. He raised an eyebrow, his voice cool, like a judge delivering a sentence. You should just live with your money, Jane. Someone like you doesn't deserve a family. I stumbled and caught myself on a nearby chair. My fingers went numb. In that moment, it felt like I lost my son, my husband, and every piece of the life I'd built, all swept out from under me. Diana snapped me back to reality, yanking me hard by the arm. Son of a bitch, she hissed. Then she stepped in front of me like a lioness, shielding me from Leo's line of fire. She shouted, "What the hell are you talking about? That's your mother, the clothes on your back, the food in your belly, your education, every bit of that came from her busting her ass for you. Don't you have a shred of decency?" Leo shot back, slapping the table for emphasis. She did this to herself. No one told her to be like that. A woman who's never home, always chasing work. How is that a mother? It was Martha who held this family together. I don't know how it all turned into this. I remember when Leo had a fever, and I carried him to the ER. I remember writing his first speech for a school competition. I remember working late, calling in every favor I had, just to find the right tutor when he started middle school. But he didn't remember. He forgot it all. That night, I didn't say another word. Diana helped me walk out of that hall I had decorated with my own 2 hands before the party even ended. Behind me were the murmurs of guests, my husband's silence, and the faint click of Martha's heels disappearing down the hall. I knew the collapse didn't start that night, but that moment, that was the last straw. From that day on, I stopped trying to prove I could be the perfect mother. I began to understand some families were never really your home, and some children had already abandoned you long before you realized it. I held on for dear life through some of the hardest years anyone could imagine. For me, that stretch began when Leo was just 2, and it didn't let up for more than a decade. Back then, Greg was still working as a project manager at a local construction firm, hardworking, sure, but barely making enough to get by. Leo was just a toddler, clinging to me like a shadow, while I was pushing a food cart up and down Massachusetts Avenue, delivering hot lunches to office buildings. The cart was something Diana and I started together. We prepped food in a friend's garage, woke up at 4 in the morning, and stood for hours in the freezing wind just to get a few lunchtime regulars. After the lunch rush, I'd rush back home, clean myself up, bathe Leo, get him to sleep, then stay up half the night tallying sales and restocking supplies. I was a one-woman machine, unnoticed, unappreciated, even by Leo. He remembers I built a company. What he doesn't remember is that before that, I was wearing clearance work boots, knee-deep in snow, just trying to afford his daycare fees. Eventually, the cart took off. We secured contracts with a few tech parks and didn't need to work the streets anymore. I filed for an LLC, built a brand, hired staff, and for the first time in years, I could actually take a holiday off with Leo. But life, as always, has a way of hitting you just when you're starting to breathe again. Greg fell off a site scaffold and suffered permanent nerve damage. Overnight, the man who used to carry our family became the one who needed carrying. And Leo, he was only 7. I had to make a choice, walk away from my growing business and play full-time caretaker, or dig in and become the one who made sure we survived. I chose the latter. From then on, I was out the door by 6, home after 9, working 6 days a week. Most days. The only way I knew Leo had done his homework or Greg had taken his meds was by watching through a security camera. My heart felt like it was pickled in vinegar, tight, sour, aching, but there was no time to complain. 5 years ago, Greg's doctors finally suggested a live-in caregiver. By then, my stomach lining was bleeding from stress. A client referred me to someone she trusted, an experienced personal care assistant, she said. Her name was Martha. She showed up to the interview in a crisp blouse, spoke gently, and seemed attentive and polite. Leo took to her instantly. She's really great, Greg said that first night. So kind. Really knows how to take care of people. And I remember feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Like someone had finally come to help carry the weight. What I didn't know was that in exchange for that breath of relief, I had opened the front door wide. Martha's care gradually extended from daily chores to something far more insidious. She cooked. She drove Leo to school. She managed Greg's pill schedule. All fine. But then she started acting like she was the woman of the house. First it was scented candles in the living room. Then a color-coded meal plan stuck on the fridge. Soon after, Leo began parroting things that didn't sound like him. You're going on another trip. Why are you always gone? Martha's so much nicer. One day, I found an old sketchbook Leo had tucked away. He'd drawn a picture of his family. 3 people. But it wasn't me. It was Leo, Greg, and Martha. I didn't confront anyone. Just closed the book and slid it back onto the shelf. I kept telling myself he's still a kid. He'll understand when he's older. Greg is just lonely. This'll pass. But some cracks don't close back up. By the time I realized Martha was no longer help, she had been with us for 5 years, living under our roof for 3. Her bond with Greg had turned into quiet intimacy, and with Leo it was as if I had been replaced. Me. I was the outsider now, the one who didn't get this family. They never said it out loud, but I felt it. Each time I came home late, Leo wouldn't look up from his dessert. He just asked coldly, "Did you eat?" No hug. No warmth. I started to dread coming home. The house I had built brick by brick had become their haven and my purgatory. Still, I believed I could fix it, that one day they'd see. Until Leo stood on that stage, in that suit I had tailored just for him, and said he wanted to disown me. That's when I knew. Some things, no matter how hard you fight, are already gone. The next morning, I woke up even earlier than usual. The moment my eyes opened, my brain started playing a cruel reel, those 2 sentences Leo said on stage looping, swelling, breaking apart. They sat like concrete in my chest, cold and immovable. Diana arrived early. She didn't say much, just sat at the kitchen bar, sipping the herbal tea I always make for her, keeping me company in silence. I wiped down the table over and over, as if scrubbing it clean could somehow erase last night's humiliation. I want to try one more time. I finally said, Diana looked at me without judgment, then nodded slowly. Just remember, dear, whatever happens, your conscience is clear. You don't owe him understanding. I nodded, but still drove straight to their apartment, the one that's under my name. Originally, I bought it so Leo would have a place to live before college. Now it had become their makeshift home, the three of them. The moment I stepped inside, I heard eggs sizzling in the kitchen. Martha was cooking. Greg was parked at the dining table watching TV. Leo sat at the counter in his pajamas, gnawing on a piece of toast. No one stood up. No one said a word. Leo, can we talk, just the two of us? I asked, keeping my tone even. No accusation, just a desperate hope for 5 quiet minutes. Leo didn't move, just kept chewing. Whatever you want to say it here. I swallowed the tightness rising in my throat and softened my voice. I know I missed a lot when you were younger. I was working constantly, and maybe it felt like I wasn't around. But that wasn't because I didn't care about you. He finally looked up, eyes cold. Is this supposed to make me feel something? I shook my head. No, I just want you to know I'm willing to change. I can hand off more of my work, spend more time with you and your dad. We're still a family. Leo snorted and put down his toast. Family, didn't last night make it clear enough for you? I turned toward Martha. She was still flipping eggs like nothing happened, but I saw the faint smirk tug at the corner of her lips. Leo, I'm not blaming you, I said. Quieter now. I just want you to see someone stepped in while I was gone and slowly pulled you away from me. That doesn't mean you truly know who I am. Greg threw the remote on the table and chimed in, his tone sharp. Are you implying something? Martha's more thoughtful than you ever were. At least she doesn't treat her family like a business venture. I turned to him. You know exactly how hard I fought out there for your physical therapy, for Leo's tuition. You can resent me for not being here, but don't pretend you don't know what I gave up for this family. Greg shrugged. You choosing to grind yourself to the bone doesn't mean we owe you gratitude. That hit like a blade to the ribs. Finally, Martha spoke, soft as ever. Jane, you're exhausted. Maybe it's time you let go. Greg and I can take care of things from here. She paused, letting it land. Her voice syrupy, but every word deliberate. Maybe you need to rest. Maybe it's time to move on. That's when I saw it all of it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family miscommunication. It was a takeover. Martha had taken over this home, Leo's emotions. And now she was eyeing the financial reins I'd built with my blood and breath. I let out a bitter laugh because suddenly it was all so obvious. You want a mother who's quiet, agreeable, and never asks about the money. That it? Leo stood up, bristling. What do you want? Another performance. You never wanted to be my mom. Now you're just late to the show. I looked at him, and the weight in my chest turned into something solid and still. I didn't need to explain anymore. All right, I said, steady. Since I'm no longer your mother, then stop using my money. Leo blinked. Confused. That wasn't what he expected. What do you mean? I'm reclaiming this apartment. Your credit cards, your allowance, your tuition account all frozen. Greg's therapy center, canceled. You said Martha can hold this family together. Great. Let her prove it. Martha stepped forward quickly, panic slipping into her voice. Jane, come on. There's no need to. I raised a hand, cutting her off. Don't bother. Your little exit from the banquet last night. Solid performance. But I saw right through it. You want to be the new matriarch of this family. Then start paying the bills. Leo's face shifted, his gaze flicked to Martha, and for the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. He was really looking at her now. Greg just turned his head and scoffed. I turned to go, but before I opened the door, I glanced back one last time at the apartment I bought for my son, for my husband. I'm not your ATM, and I'm not your fool. I owe you nothing. I opened the door. Silence. Then I heard it soft, almost instinctive. Mom, Leo said. I didn't turn back. That moment was my clean break. Sometimes it's not that you didn't try hard enough. Sometimes they never wanted you to be part of their story. And I was done auditioning for a role that was never meant to be mine. When I stepped out of their front door, my head was spinning, but my body had never felt more grounded. The wind whipped around me, tugging at the hem of my dress as I stood by my car. My finger hovered over the key fob for a moment. Then I pressed every button at once. That was the moment I knew I hadn't failed. I had finally woken up. The first thing I did after getting home was call my financial advisor. I asked her to freeze every account connected to Leo and Greg credit cards, living expenses, shared spending accounts, even Leo's college fund. She paused on the other end. Jane, are you sure? I've never been more certain. Then I called the rehab center and canceled Greg's appointments for the upcoming month. I told them from now on, all future invoices should go directly to him. That evening, I stood in my kitchen and made myself a pot of oxtail soup, me favorite. It had been so long since I cooked just for myself. The next morning, I walked into the office. My desk was clean, the sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor like a quiet invitation. It felt like the rest of the world was 1,000 miles away. I called in my legal counsel and business partner and formally initiated the process to restructure the company's ownership and leadership. I no longer want any family member involved or benefiting from this business. I said calm, but resolute. Then I dialed my divorce attorney. I'm ready to file. As soon as possible. She took a breath on the other end. Jane, are you absolutely sure this is the right time? I looked down at the copy of my marriage certificate in my hands. I've been sure for a long time. I just don't want to keep waiting. I stayed late at the office that night. When I finally closed my laptop, I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city come alive as dusk gave way to blinking lights and moving headlights on Massachusetts Avenue. Somewhere beyond the skyline, the harbor's lighthouse flickered steady and distant. Peace, long overdue, settled onto my shoulders like a warm shawl. I knew it was time to leave that house. Not because I no longer belonged there, but because I'd never truly been welcome in the first place. The following morning, I packed a few clothes and my laptop, and drove up the coast to a small apartment I'd bought years ago for weekend getaways. It wasn't large, but it was quiet. You could see the ocean through the windows. I didn't leave a note. I didn't look back. That house, the one I spent 15 years of my life paying for, was going on the market by week's end. There was nothing left there I needed. I didn't turn on the TV that day. Didn't check my phone. I just sat on the balcony in the sun, watching kids on skateboards and listening to the wind move through the eaves. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not joy, not relief, but something steady, safe, like someone who had finally stopped running. I spent the afternoon sorting through old files, deleted Leo's baby photos from my cloud, removed Greg's name from my emergency contact list. I updated my banking beneficiaries and scheduled an appointment with my estate lawyer to revise my trust. No tears, no bitterness, just a quiet, methodical unraveling of the web they'd built around me. That night, I soaked in the tub, the water hot enough to sting. I didn't think about whether someone needed tea, or medication, or a ride. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence settle. And I knew I had finally logged out of their emotional system. I wasn't the woman scrambling to prove she could be the perfect mother or the patient wife anymore. I was becoming someone else, someone I hadn't met in years. A woman who lived for herself. After I cut them off financially, I didn't reach out again. But the updates still trickled in, one by one, through different channels. The first to call was my property manager. Ms. Jane, I've finalized the repossession of the townhouse on Parkside Lane. The keys have been returned, and the former tenant's belongings cleared out. Any trouble? No major conflict. One of the women seemed emotionally unstable, but everything was handled. They moved out 2 days ago. I hung up without a flicker of emotion. It felt like reclaiming a piece of property that had been occupied for far too long. Diana stopped by that day with a special delivery, a photo she'd printed, showing Martha stocking shelves in a supermarket while Greg leaned on the register, one leg barely steady, his face pale and gaunt. They looked like they walked straight out of a movie. She sneered over coffee. Martha in a store uniform slapping price tags, and Greg pushing carts. Think they still have the energy for romance now? I didn't reply, just smiled faintly. Karma doesn't need me to send it. It always arrives on time. Word is they're living in an old rental out in the suburbs, dead grass in the yard, barely functioning heat. Since Leo's college fund was frozen, his financial aid got stuck in limbo too. He was banking on scholarships, but his grades have tanked. He's on the verge of losing his admission. I was jotting something down on a sticky note when Diana added, he didn't show up to the state math competition. Didn't you hire a Stanford coach for him last year? I nodded. I'm not saying this to be cruel. Diana said gently, leaning in. But he needs this. He needs to learn that without your home, he can't even stand. That afternoon, I booked a massage. On a whim, I added a facial at the spa. Lying back in the chair, eyes closed, All I heard was the scent of citrus mist in the air and soft violin music in the distance. It was the first time in years I had taken a weekday afternoon to do something just for minute for a job. Not for a child, not for a husband. Just me. As I was getting dressed to leave, my phone buzzed. Greg. I let it ring. 3 minutes later. An email came through. Same sender. Subject line. Negotiation. I opened it. The message was rambling. It started with, "We were once married, and Leo needs stability." Then came, "You're still the financial anchor of this family." And finally, the ask, 10,000 a month, in installments for Leo's living expenses and my continued rehabilitation. I chuckled, forwarded the email to my attorney, and typed one line in the subject. "Please prepare an official response." The next day, I had my assistant schedule a meeting with Greg at the coffee shop downstairs. I didn't want him in my office. That space was clean and he wasn't worth dirtying it. He showed up in a pilled wool coat, looking rough. Pale skin, unkempt hair. He coughed as he sat down, trying to play the sympathy card. "Jane, Leo's not doing great lately. Martha's under a lot of stress too." I said nothing, just stared at him. He forced a laugh, then got to the point. "Look, Leo's technically an adult, but he's still in school. You can't really leave him high and dry. He said I'm not his mother anymore. Said you two are his real family, didn't he?" Greg opened his mouth, but no words came out. I leaned back in my chair. "You came here for money. Let's not pretend otherwise. Martha's burnt out. She thought playing nurse would earn her a free ride. Turns out, life doesn't work that way." Greg's expression hardened. "You can't be this heartless. Leo's still your son. He had no trouble disowning me when it served him. Now that things are hard, I'm useful again. He's an adult. I don't owe either of you a thing." He went quiet, then finally muttered, "I helped build that company too." "Did you? For how many days? Don't forget you bailed for over a decade. When I was holding everything together, you were in physical therapy, and Martha was watching soap operas on my couch." Greg stood, slamming a hand on the table. "What, you want us to starve?" I stood too, calm as ever. "Whether you starve or survive is no longer my concern. I'm not your safety net. If you care about Leo, go get a second job. Don't come begging here." I walked out without looking back. He didn't follow. When I glanced once through the cafe window, he was still seated, shoulders slumped, suddenly looking 10 years older. It wasn't me cutting off Leo that scared him. It was the realization that without me, none of them had the capacity to care for him. Maybe that was his real fear. I thought I had cut them off cleanly until Greg's mother, Rolla, showed up outside my office building. The front desk buzzed. "Ms. Jane, there's an elderly woman in the lobby. She says she's your former mother-in-law. She insists on seeing you." I paused. Then I said, "Send her up." She walked in wearing a faded coat, her hair pulled back tightly, like she was trying to keep herself together by sheer force. But her eyes betrayed her tired, frantic, desperate. "Jane, honey," she said the moment she sat down, like someone who'd been wandering through a desert and finally spotted water. "Greg's not doing well. He's getting worse every day. Leo's lost weight, too." The boys barely got the energy to talk. "You're a mother," she added. "How can you stand by and do nothing?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I handed her a mug of warm water. "I heard they moved out." She nodded, eyes reddening. "It's bad. Martha's working part-time at a grocery store. Greg complains about leg pain, but won't go to the hospital, says it's too expensive. I'm just an old woman. I can't do much, so I came to you." I thought of that email asking for $10,000, and the corner of my mouth curled slightly. I thought they said I wasn't family anymore. Her face twitched, but then she forced a smile. "They didn't mean it. Just words in anger. No matter what, you're still his mother. Greg, he's your husband." "Ex-husband," I corrected. The smile froze on her lips. "Still, your family. You can't just let them starve or die. Greg's on knockoff meds Martha buys from some friend. But if you could just..." She trailed off, pulling out a neatly folded slip of paper from her purse and placing it gently on the table. "It's last month's medical bill. Maybe you could help a little." I glanced at it, nodded calmly. "I'll take a look." She finally exhaled and stood up, thanking me profusely as she left. I stared at the paper for a long time after she'd gone. Not because of the amount, but because several of the drug names were completely unfamiliar. That night, I dug up Greg's original treatment records and compared the prescriptions line by line. Some of them didn't match. At all. I didn't call Rolla back. Instead, I dialed Megan. She manages our company's food procurement and has been a close friend for years. Conveniently, her sister works in billing at the downtown hospital. I need you to check someone's recent treatment and pharmacy records. Who? She asked. Greg and Martha. I think someone's gaming the system. She didn't even hesitate. Give me a day. After I hung up, I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling lights. It wasn't the money I was mad about. It was the fact they were still playing the same old card sickness, and the chill to manipulate me. The next day around noon, Megan sent me a text. Jane, you need to come see this in person. When I arrived, she had a neat stack of printouts waiting for me on her desk. Greg did go to the hospital, she said, flipping the first page. But only for 2 routine checks under $300 total. Then she tapped the bill Rolla gave me. This one claims nearly $4,000 in medications, half of which, she pointed at a section highlighted in red, was sourced off-site, under Martha's name. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew. Her voice dropped. It means someone's running side deals with prescription drugs. My fingers curled against the edge of the paper. And that's not the worst part, Megan continued. Some of those meds were swapped out for low-grade generic cheap stuff, nowhere near what Greg should be taking. I closed my eyes. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was calculated exploitation. And worse, they were putting Greg's health on the line to make it happen. Are you going to the police? I didn't answer right away. I calmly slid the papers into my file folder. Not yet. I need more proof. But eventually. I want her to say it herself whose money she took, whose health she gambled with. When I walked out of that building, the sky was blindingly blue. The sun felt sharp on my skin. And for the first time, I saw the shape of my life for what it was. I had spent years building a house I didn't live in, a home where other people slept, ate, and thrived while I maintained the plumbing, paid the utilities, and kept the lights on. But I wasn't family. I was the infrastructure. I finally knew what had to be done. This wasn't about turning off the lights. This time, I was tearing the entire structure down steel beam by steel beam until nothing remained. I didn't want to just sit around waiting for the police to slowly investigate. And I sure as hell didn't want Leo getting tipped off before I was ready. So I decided to meet with her alone. I called Martha and asked to meet at a coffee shop downtown. She showed up right on time, wearing that beige knit cardigan, makeup flawless, as always, looking every bit the responsible family caregiver. You'd never guess she was involved in fraud, misuse of funds, or identity manipulation. Martha. I nodded. Have a seat. As she sat down, I turned off my phone screen. The recorder had been running long before she walked in. She looked a little hesitant, probably thinking I'd come to talk about Greg's medical bills. She launched into her script right away. I know you're still upset with Leo. He's just a kid. He said some things he didn't mean. We're not trying to depend on you. It's just been really tough lately. I didn't let her finish. I slid the folder across the table. I've been reviewing some financial records, I said, casually flipping through a few photocopies. There were a few expenses I couldn't quite make sense of. Thought it'd be best we talked face to face, clear things up before jumping to conclusions. Her hand froze as she opened the folder. Her face began to shift. This must be a misunderstanding. She tried to laugh it off. I've just been doing what Greg told me. I'm only the caregiver. You know, caregiver. I raised an eyebrow, tone even. You authorized our joint account. You filed 2 government reimbursement forms with my name listed as the primary guardian. Martha, I'm really curious, where did you get those documents? She faltered, clearly not expecting me to be this direct. Greg gave them to me, she said, eyes drifting to the window. I didn't mean anything by it. I just wanted to keep the household running smoothly, using my Social Security care credits, $5,000 a month. She let out a soft chuckle. You really are a numbers person, aren't you? I didn't reply. Silence hung between us like a weight. Then she dropped the smile, voice hardening. You just can't stand that I know Greg better than you do, that I understand this family more than you ever did. I let out a small laugh, like she'd struck a nerve, but my voice stayed calm. Too bad understanding doesn't make anything you did legal. A flicker of panic passed over her face. Then she tried to compose herself. I went on. I paid a pharmacist to audit every medication on that list. 3 of them are sleep aids. 1 is for chronic arthritis. Greg doesn't have any of those conditions. She licked her lips. He's had trouble sleeping. Where did those meds go? I cut her off, cold as ice. She didn't answer. So, what is this then? You dragging up old receipts, or you here to cut a deal? She leaned in, voice low, almost daring me. I just want to hear it from you, I said, staring straight at her. How much have you taken from Greg all these years? She didn't speak right away. Her eyes scanned my face like she was trying to figure out what I already knew. Then she shrugged. Fine. You want the truth. I've handled everything since his stroke. Feeding him, washing him, convincing him to take meds, dragging him to therapy. I met with lawyers, filled out paperwork, covered for you when you were off chasing your next promotion. She leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. I took money from his account. That was my compensation. He said so himself. Said you were cold. That you only cared about work. He needed someone who'd actually show up. Her fingers tapped twice on the table. You thought your career was for your family. He built a different family a long time ago. I just made it run better. I didn't flinch. I just nodded, placed my hand calmly on my purse. Then I stood and gave her a faint smile. Thanks for your honesty today, Martha. I got exactly what I came for. Her expression froze. What do you mean? I turned my back to her and said softly, I mean, sometimes the truth's worth more than the lie. As I stepped out of that cafe, the sun hit my face. The air smelled like caramel and roasted beans. I didn't look back. I knew she'd rush to erase the trail. Maybe cry to Leo. Say I was losing my mind. What she didn't know was that a copy of that recording had already been delivered to my attorney. She never saw me as a threat. But I'm no longer the woman who ran between kitchen and boardroom, trying to hold it all together with love and loyalty. She thought I'd still bend for the sake of the family. She was wrong. The recorder in my bag kept running. But I knew. I had all I needed. It was enough. More than enough. I didn't look back when I walked out of that cafe. Instead, I hailed a cab straight to the law firm, not the old-school family trust guy we'd used for years, but the sharp, no-nonsense legal team Diana had recommended. They specialized in women's rights and weren't afraid to draw blood if needed. We received the audio copy you mailed in, said Kelly, one of the lead attorneys, as she slipped on a pair of headphones. But I'm glad you came in person. There are some details we need to go over together. I nodded, settling into the chair, hands resting firmly on my knees. I don't want to drag this out. I want to file charges. Against Martha and Greg. 2. If there are documents with his signature. I want everything submitted. Kelly took off the headphones, her eyes sharp and steady. You need to understand her legal team will likely attack your mental state. They'll try to portray you as unstable or irrational. They'll say you're unfit to manage finances or decision-making. They might even try to revoke your rights under the trust. I know, I said quietly. That's why I came to you. I don't just want to fight, I want to win. She smiled just slightly. Then let's get to work. In the days that followed, I treated this case like it was my full-time job. I organized every bank statement, email thread, property transfer Greg had ever signed, and every government form Martha had filed for subsidies. I printed, labeled, and indexed them all. After years of running a business alone, I knew exactly how to take a mess and break it down into manageable pieces. Only this time, the project was my life, and the goal was crystal clear. Take back what's mine. Burn down the scaffolding they used to climb over me. A few days later, Kelly called. We've transcribed the recording and filed it as preliminary evidence. It's enough to support a civil case for financial fraud. We can also report her to DHS for benefit abuse. Are you ready for this? I looked at the old sketch Leo had drawn when he was 12. It still hung on the wall. Greg stood by the oven, baking pizza. I was beside him, smiling. I pulled it down and dropped it in a cardboard box. I'm ready. I hit the call button. And I'm not waiting for them to come to me. I want them blindsided. For days after the legal notice went out, my phone rang. Leo. His voice was familiar and colder than I remembered. Are you insane, Mom? I leaned back on the couch. You're going to have to be more specific. You filed a lawsuit against Martha. Do you even realize what this is doing to Dad? He's in no condition to deal with any of this. I closed my eyes for a moment, swallowing the ache that rose in my throat. Leo. I could have gone straight to the police. I didn't. I followed the law. Everything I'm doing is by the book. There was a pause on the line. What do you want? I let out a bitter laugh. You've always said all I cared about was money. So I figured, I'll start by reclaiming what's mine. He hung up. No more words. No apology. I didn't cry. I walked into the kitchen instead, pulled open the bottom drawer, and reached for the prenuptial agreement I'd tucked away years ago. Inside was a small memorandum clause. It stated that in the event of deception or concealed major medical decisions during the marriage, the other spouse had the right to revoke parts of the joint property claim. I'd signed it out of fear. Now, it was my weapon. That night, I slept soundly. The next morning, Diana knocked on my door holding the local newspaper. "Did you see this?" she asked, unfolding it on my kitchen table. Bottom right of the front page, easy to miss, was a short article. "Private caregiver under investigation for identity fraud and welfare misuse. Police have opened a case." Diana looked at me, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "Looks like she finally figured out you're not the pushover she thought you were." I smiled back. "No," I said quietly, "the real war's just getting started." I sat in the car, gripping a copy of the legal notice I'd just picked up from Kelly's office. One thing was certain. Martha's good days were officially numbered. Kelly's team moved fast. The moment I handed over the recording, they secured the evidence and began filing preliminary documents. I signed several declarations and, for the first time, laid out everything that had happened over the past few years, from Greg's illness to the account transfers, Leo's betrayal, and the greed beneath Martha's polished smile. I thought I'd break down telling it all, but I didn't. I spoke calmly. No accusation. No tears. Maybe the grief had already been drained out of me that night at the party. Kelly and I sat across from each other in the conference room. She skimmed through the documents, her voice steady. "We can proceed with civil charges. At least 3 separate fraud claims, possibly even identity theft." I nodded. "I'm all in." She looked up at me, serious. "You need to understand this isn't going to be a short fight. If they feel cornered, they'll lash out. They'll do anything to discredit you." I let out a dry laugh, soft as paper in the wind. They already started. I slid my phone across the table. A few texts from Leo. "You're going too far. Mom, I just don't understand why you're blowing everything up like this. I just want us all to live our own lives in peace." Kelly raised an eyebrow. "So he's playing the innocent victim now." "He always has," I said with a shrug. "The moment things don't go his way, he puts on the wounded son act. But this time, I'm not falling for it." Just then, another message came in. Greg's sister, Leo's aunt, Lana. "We almost never talked. Lana, I heard you're getting lawyers involved with Martha. Are you okay? I also heard Leo's been kind of upset lately. Want to meet for a cup of tea?" I stared at the message for a few seconds, then flipped the phone face down on the table. Kelly asked, "Are you going to respond?" I smiled faintly. "No rush. Let them squirm for a bit." We turned our attention to Greg's financial authorizations and account records. Kelly's assistant had uncovered something interesting. Greg's so-called updated representative form hadn't gone through proper legal channels. No signed medical evaluation, no attorney's seal, no formal witness. "This document has no legal standing," Kelly said, sliding the draft across to me. "If Greg signed this while under Martha's long-term medication influence, we can add criminal charges. Does that mean she could go to jail?" I asked. "No guarantees. But I can tell you this: she won't be touching another cent of your family's money." I closed my eyes and exhaled deeply. That breath, I'd been holding it for far too long. Later that day, I got home, hung up my coat, hadn't even taken off my shoes yet when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Diana. She was holding a cake box, her expression unusually tentative. I opened the door. "What are you doing here?" She lifted the box slightly. "Saw the news. Figured you probably didn't eat dinner." I froze for a beat. Suddenly, I felt like crying, but I said nothing, just stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the kitchen. She cut the cake, made some tea, and settled in like we'd done 100 times before over the past 2 decades. She didn't ask questions. She let the silence fill the space first. After a while, she spoke, her voice low. "You really going to take them to court?" I nodded. "They crossed too many lines." She didn't try to talk me out of it. She didn't pass judgment. She just refilled my cup and said quietly, "Then don't go soft now." I looked down at the steaming tea, speaking almost to myself. "Mercy's for people who deserve it. Greg doesn't. As for Leo, I'm still holding out for one last chance. But that doesn't mean I'll keep abandoning myself." Diana didn't say anything else. She just sat with Mesallant, steady. On the day of the hearing, I sat at the plaintiff's table, fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of still warm coffee. The courtroom was small, just 3 rows of gallery seats. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, stretching shadows long and sharp across the floor. Greg had been hospitalized for a month by then. Before that, Kelly had finalized the divorce paperwork for me. She left no loose ends. We closed all joint accounts, froze the insurance transfers tied to Martha, and secured the portion of assets legally mine. Greg, too sick to attend court, signed the dissolution of marriage documents under the supervision of both a doctor and a lawyer. There were no fights, no yelling, just silence and a pen, nearly out of ink. And now, standing at the defendant's bench, was Martha Holland. Does the defendant understand the charges brought against her? The judge asked. Martha didn't look at me. She gave a small nod. No makeup today. Just a washed-out gray sweater. She looked like any ordinary woman. Kelly stood, crisp and composed as she handed over the exhibits. We've submitted records of bank account changes, pharmaceutical purchase receipts, a copy of the public aid application, and a recording in which the defendant clearly describes her actions, including the misuse of funds and falsification of identity during the application process. When the audio played, the room seemed to freeze. Martha's voice was smooth and calm, but dripping with calculation. Of course I touched his money. That was earned compensation. What did you think I was here for? Love? Family? The court found Martha guilty of asset misappropriation and identity fraud. She was ordered to repay $120,000 in verified illegal gains and to serve 18 months of supervised community correction. I didn't look at her. I looked at Leo. He sat silently in the gallery, pale, hands clenched together like a sculpture. It wasn't until Martha finally admitted under repeated questioning that she'd manipulated Greg's muddled mind during his illness to change financial authorizations that Leo's eyes turned red. He no longer wore the mock turtlenecks Martha used to pick out for him. Instead, he showed up in the old college jacket he used to love. Faded, but clean. For a moment, he looked like a young man stepping out of fog for the first time, standing right in the middle of the truth, unsure who to blame, or even how to begin. The sentence wasn't harsh, but behind that paper verdict, Leo's entire sense of home had collapsed. After the hearing, I didn't wait for them to leave. Kelly and I went straight to file the final documents. The divorce agreement was now legally effective. Per our prenup, I retained my original investments and post-marriage income. Greg's marital gains, including the beachfront house, several trust funds, and part of his retirement account, were to be divided accordingly. I kept the old house, and with part of my settlement, I established a trust fund to support Parkinson's caregiving programs. That evening, when I got home, Diana was already sitting in my living room. You won, she said, sipping her tea. Even your revenge was classy beyond belief. I set my bag down and smiled. I didn't win. I just stopped running. She nodded thoughtfully. Leo came to see you today. I froze. He said he wants to apologize. In person. I said nothing. Do you want to see him? I shook my head, then nodded. Finally, I said, not yet. A few days later, I received a letter from Leo. He had folded the envelope himself. The letter was short. Mom, I returned the check that belonged to you. I found a job, just a busboy gig, but it's enough to cover my basics. Thank you for everything you did. I'm sorry I didn't see it all sooner. If there's ever a day you'd be willing to give me a chance, I'd like to reintroduce myself to you. Your son, Leo. I didn't reply, but a quiet calm settled inside me, a peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't that I couldn't forgive. I just finally understood. Not all mothers are obligated to forgive unconditionally. Some mothers need to choose themselves. There's no such thing as a clean chapter break in life. But sometimes, you do get to write the ending on your own page.